Welcome to Boring History for Relaxing channel. Tonight we slip into a village night where warmth is not a button you press. It is a skill you practice. You stand outside in the kind of cold that makes your nose feel like it is auditioning to fall off. The sky is a dark lid. The ground is stiff. Somewhere, a dog decides your footsteps are suspicious, and you probably will not survive this. Emotionally, because the luxury of central heating is about to vanish like a polite thought at a loud dinner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I enjoy imagining you listening to this while your neighbours sleep and your phone glows like a tiny campfire. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a home that does not have a modern fireplace with a tidy brick surround and a decorative mantle for sentimental candles. Instead, warmth lives in the heart of the room, low and practical. A hearth that has been used all day like a workbench for survival. Soup has simmered there, bread has baked near it, wet clothes have steamed beside it. Now the day folds itself down into night, and everyone's eyes drift toward the fire as if it is a stern relative whose approval you require. The first trick is simple, and it is also the entire game. You do not let the heat escape. Long before bedtime, someone tends the coals with the same focus you use when you're trying not to burn your tongue on tea. They rake embers inward, gathering them into a tighter mound. They add a dense piece of wood, often hardwood if it is available, because it burns slower and steadier than the quick. Flashy stuff. This is not about a dramatic blaze. This is about patience, like waiting for a kettle that refuses to hurry. Then comes the banking. Ash is not just mess, it is insulation. A layer of ash and cinders can be pulled over the embers to slow the fire's breath, keeping a core of heat alive through the night. It looks like you are burying the fire on purpose, and you are. The goal is a hidden glow that will still be there in the morning, ready to be coaxed back into flame with a few careful puffs and a bit of tinder. In many parts of Europe, this basic practice is common for centuries, because fuel is labour and labour is life. You also notice how the room itself cooperates. Openings are treated like suspicious strangers. A door is shut. A hanging cloth is drawn across a drafty gap. If there is a smoke hood or a crude chimney arrangement, it is managed with the weary realism of people who know that perfect ventilation is a fantasy. Too open, and the heat runs away. Too closed, and the room gets smoky. The household lives in the middle, in that narrow zone where the air is just breathable enough and the warmth is just stubborn enough. This is the kind of compromise that builds character, and also coughs. Someone moves the cooking pot off the hottest spot and sets it where it will stay warm, not boiling. Like a calm animal settling down. Food is heat stored in water and fat, and it matters that there will be something warm to swallow if a child wakes shivering. Even the objects near the hearth become part of the plan. A bench is nudged closer. A stool is dragged to a favoured patch of warmth. Your feet find that patch and instantly become loyal to it, refusing to leave, like they have signed a contract. You watch the evening routine tighten around the fire. Work becomes smaller and quieter. Hands mend, peel, patch, and twist fibres into something useful. Stories come out because stories are free. And free is a very popular price. The firelight makes faces look softer, and shadows look like they have opinions. There is a gentle rhythm to it. The scrape of a spoon, the hiss of a log settling, the sleepy sigh of someone who has been cold all day and is finally, briefly, winning. A mainstream truth sits in the centre of this moment. For many village households, the open hearth is the primary heat source, and the management of its fuel is a daily discipline. Firewood must be gathered, purchased, traded, or scavenged. In some regions, people also burn peat, dried dung, or brush, depending on what the land offers. The choice is not aesthetic. It is what you can get without starving later. The joke is that you are not curating ambience, you're negotiating with a landscape. And because humans cannot resist making things slightly weirder, you notice a quirky habit that pops up in different places, saving the fire itself as an object. In some communities, A household might carry embers in a covered pot to a neighbour if a fire goes out, because making a new fire from scratch is slow and sometimes difficult, without reliable tinder and sparks. The ember is treated like a living thing you borrow and return. It is the original shared resource, a little orange heartbeat travelling carefully through the cold. As night deepens, the household's attention turns into a kind of gentle vigilance. The fire must not flare up too much, but it also must not die. Someone checks it the way you check your phone, except their notification system is a faint glow under ash and the subtle smell of smoke. If the embers are too exposed, they pull more ash over them. If the mound seems too smothered, they open a small pocket for air. You can feel the room's temperature shift in tiny waves, like the house is breathing. There is also the constant question of safety. An open hearth is a blessing with sharp edges. Sparks jump, smoke creeps. A stray coal can ruin a night in a way that does not require any imagination at all. So routines develop that look almost ceremonial. Tools are placed where they can be grabbed fast. Water is kept nearby. Children are warned, and then warned again, and then warned a third time because children are professionally curious. If you listen closely, you can hear an adult voice deliver the timeless line, "Do not touch that. It is hot." This line, by the way, has never stopped working. Historians still argue whether many ordinary homes were consistently warmer than we assume, or whether people simply adapted to indoor cold as a normal condition. The evidence is scattered. Building remains, soot patterns, household accounts, the way laws and customs talk about fuel. Some scholars picture interiors that are surprisingly temperate around the hearth, especially when the room is crowded and the fire is steady. Others emphasize how quickly heat bleeds away through thin walls and leaky roofs, making warmth a small island in a big sea of chill. Standing here, you can feel both ideas at once, because the hearth is genuinely warm, and the corners of the room are genuinely not. Eventually a spoon. The moment arrives when the fire is banked for the last time. The brightest flames are allowed to fade. The embers settle into a dull, protected glow. Faces turn away from the hearth with a reluctant softness, like leaving a friend at the end of a long day. You're not going to sleep in a perfectly warm world. You're going to sleep in a world where warmth has been concentrated, guarded, and rationed, and where the night is treated like an opponent you can outsmart, but never fully defeat. And as you move toward your rest, you realize something oddly comforting. The house is quiet, but the heat is not gone. It is simply hidden, tucked under ash, waiting. Much like you, ideally, in about 20 minutes. You let the last conversation fade into murmurs, because night in a village does not reward people who keep pacing around like they forgot something in the oven. The room cools the way a pond surface goes still, quietly, with no announcement. Now the real strategy shows itself, not in the fire, but in the bed. You look at the sleeping arrangements and realise you have been lied to by modern furniture marketing. This is not a bed as a display object. This is a heat trap with a pillow. The first thing you notice is that sleeping is not automatically done in the biggest, airiest space. The warmest sleeping place is chosen the way you choose a seat near the heater in a cafe. Except the stakes are your toes. If a house has more than one room, the sleeping often drifts toward the most protected interior space, away from the outer walls and away from the door that hisses cold every time it opens. If there is only one main room, the bed is arranged where the drafts are weakest, sometimes tucked into a corner that looks inconvenient until you remember that inconvenience is cheaper than frostbite. Then you see the structure itself. In many regions, people build beds that are partly enclosed, like little wooden rooms inside the room. A box bed, a bed closet, a curtained bed, a bed with high sides. These are all variations on the same idea. Make the air around the sleeper smaller and easier to warm. You could call it the ancient ancestor of a sleeping bag, except it is made from timber, patience, and a willingness to climb into a narrow space without complaining. You, of course, complain internally because you are you, but you also understand it immediately when you lean in and feel that the air inside is noticeably softer. Curtains are not decoration. They are doors made of cloth. Heavy linen or wool drapes can be pulled around the bed, reducing air movement and holding on to what heat the body produces. It is like being wrapped in a private little climate. The best part is that the family can keep the main room cooler and still sleep in relative comfort. The worst part is that you now have a curtain near your face, and if you are the kind of person who wakes up panicked in a hotel because the curtains moved, congratulations, you're about to have a historical experience. Bedding is a layered system, and each layer has a job. The underlayer might be straw or a stuffed mattress, sometimes filled with chaff, dried plant material, or whatever can be spared. Over that comes linen sheets if the household can afford them, or rougher cloth if not. Wool blankets are prized because wool keeps warmth even when the air is damp. If you have ever owned a wool blanket and wondered why it feels like it weighs as much as your regrets. This is why it is valuable. It presses down, blocks air pockets from exchanging with the cold room, and holds steady warmth close to the body. A mainstream fact quietly sits here. In many pre-modern households, textiles are among the most valuable possessions. Cloth takes time to produce, and that time is measured in hours of spinning, weaving, and sewing. Beds, therefore, are not just comfort. They are storage for wealth. People sleep under their assets, literally. You're lying there thinking about warmth, and the household is also thinking about not letting a mouse chew through the thing that took a month to make. Now you meet the strange, charming logic of sleeping clothing. In a modern setting, people argue about whether sleeping in socks is healthy, as if there is a committee. In a village night, socks are not a lifestyle choice. They are a treaty with the universe. Nightcaps are common in many places, because the head loses heat quickly, and because hair can hold dampness. A cap keeps warmth in, and keeps the scalp from feeling like a cold plate. Shirts might be kept on. Sometimes people wear layers that are specifically for sleeping, often old garments that are no longer fashionable enough for daylight, which is a polite way of saying they are too patched to impress anyone but still perfectly good at being fabric. You also learn that beds are not always private in the modern sense. A single bed might serve multiple sleepers. Children might pile in together, not only for affection but for physics. You warm each other. You become a small group of mammals using the oldest heating technology available. If you have ever shared a blanket with someone who steals it in the night, you already understand the dark side of this system. The medieval version of that problem is simply louder and includes more elbows. In some households, the bed is raised, and this is not just a style choice. Cold air settles low. Being off the floor helps. The space beneath can also be used for storage, and storage itself can act as an insulating mass, blocking drafts. You look at the underside of the bed and see baskets, bundles, and tools, all quietly working as draft baffles. It is like the house is constantly trying to plug its own leaks with whatever it owns. Here comes a quirky tidbit that always makes people blink: warming pans. In later periods and in wealthier homes, a metal pan with a long handle can be filled with hot coals and slid between the sheets to warm the bed before anyone gets in. It sounds luxurious until you remember the coals are inches from the fabric. The technique requires careful timing, careful movement, and a strong desire not to set your inheritance on fire. The warming pan is comfort with a slight threat, which honestly describes a lot of historical technology. If the household does not have a warming pan, they still use pre-warming in simpler forms. Blankets may be hung near the hearth earlier in the evening, turned occasionally so the dampness leaves and the fibres hold a bit of heat. Clothing intended for sleep may be placed where it stays warm but does not scorch. The goal is to avoid the shock of climbing into a bed that feels like a slab. You know that shock. Your soul leaves your body for a second, and then it comes back annoyed. The debate that quietly runs under all this is about privacy and comfort. Historians still argue whether enclosed beds are primarily about warmth, or whether they also serve social purposes, like controlling who sees whom, or offering a sense of boundary in crowded homes. Some argue that the curtain is a thermal tool first. Others point out that a curtain also creates a little world where you can change clothes, whisper, nurse a child, or simply not be watched. Warmth and privacy are not rivals, they cooperate. As the household settles, the air inside the bed enclosure becomes its own small atmosphere. Breaths add humidity and warmth. The cloth shifts with tiny movements. The outside room grows quieter and colder, but inside the bedding the temperature stabilizes. You're held in layers of plant stuffing, cloth, and wool, and you can feel how every layer slows the exchange between your warm skin and the cold air beyond. You let your body sink into the logic of it. Warmth is not produced in one heroic act. It is conserved in dozens of small choices. A bed built like a shelter, curtains that stop the air, wool that refuses to surrender heat, clothes that stay on, people who sleep close, even the bed's placement in the room, chosen like a chess move against winter. And just as your eyes start to feel heavy, one last joke slips in like a sleepy thought. If anyone ever tells you that humans are not engineered for winter, you can politely point at this bed and say, "Actually, we built a wooden burrito and moved in." You shift your weight and listen to the night settle, and the house answers with small noises that sound like it is thinking. Wood creaks, fabric whispers. Somewhere, a tiny draft tests a corner like a thief checking a latch. The bed is warm enough to make you hopeful, but hope is not always the warmest thing available. Now you meet the objects that carry heat on purpose, the quiet tools that do not need a blazing hearth beside you to do their job. A person rises carefully, not with drama, but with the practiced motions of someone who has done this 1,000 nights. They move toward the place where warmth still lingers. They pick up a stone that has been sitting near the heat for hours, not glowing, not smoking, just thoroughly warmed through like a loaf that finished baking a while ago. It is the size of a fist or a small melon, chosen for density and for not exploding. You appreciate the unspoken requirement. Do not choose the one that decides to crack and spit. This is a village, not a science experiment. The stone is wrapped. That part matters. A stone pressed directly to the skin is not a comfort. It is a lesson. So it goes into cloth. Sometimes several layers, sometimes tucked into a sock or a spare piece of linen, tied off like a parcel. Then it is carried to bed like a small, precious animal. The stone slides down toward the feet, because feet are loud complainers, and because keeping the extremities warm helps the whole body feel less betrayed by winter. This is one of the simplest ideas humans ever had, and it still works. Heat storage. A dense object soaks up warmth, then releases it slowly. The room can be cold, and your feet can still be in a pocket of steady comfort. It is not a miracle. It is physics with a bedtime routine. In other places, the same logic appears in baked bricks or ceramic tiles. If a household has an oven used for bread, there is a moment when the oven is still warm after baking. Bricks can be heated nearby, or ceramic pieces warmed at the edge of the oven mouth. These are not tossed in casually. They are handled with respect, like you handle a mug of tea that is hotter than you expected. If you have ever tried to act tough and then immediately regretted it, you understand the vibe. A mainstream historical fact lives here. Portable heat sources like warm stones and bricks are widely used across different regions and time periods, especially where sleeping spaces are separated from the main fire or where fuel is scarce. People do not want to keep a large fire burning all night because it eats wood and increases risk, so they carry the heat instead, like moving daylight into a darker room. The technique has rules that everyone learns early, mostly because the punishment for ignoring rules is unpleasant. Stones are selected carefully. Some kinds of rock can trap moisture and crack when heated, so families learn which stones behave. They learn how close to place them to the fire, how long to warm them, and how to test them without burning their hands. They learn to wrap them thickly enough that the heat is gentle. They learn to keep them away from a loose straw bedding if there is any chance of scorching. Winter teaches fast. Now you meet the more adventurous cousin of the hot stone, the ember container. In some households, especially where people are confident and a bit reckless, a small metal pot or lidded container might hold embers and be set safely on a hearthstone or near a sleeping place. This is not common everywhere, and it is not always safe. But the idea shows up because the craving for warmth is persuasive. The ember pot is like inviting a tiny dragon into your bedroom and insisting it will behave because you asked nicely. Most households prefer the calmer option. Warmed objects. Sometimes even warm water in a tightly sealed vessel, wrapped and placed near the body. The water cools slowly and gives off heat with none of the spark risk. It is also heavy, and if it leaks you wake up in the kind of damp misery that makes you question your life choices. But if it holds, it is quietly wonderful. You notice that these tools are often shared and rotated. A stone might be warmed, used for a while, then swapped or rewarmed if there is still enough heat available near the cooking area. If the family has more than one stone or brick, they can stagger them. One warms while another works. It is a small domestic system, like running a battery charger, except the charger is a fire and the battery is a rock. A quirky tidbit slips in here, the sort of thing that sounds like a joke until you remember humans will try anything. In some places, people warm items like flat irons or even smooth pieces of metal meant for other tasks, then use them as heat sources at night. A tool becomes a heater temporarily. The risk is obvious, but the logic is equally obvious. Anything dense that holds heat is valuable when the air tries to steal it from you. If you are tempted to do this at home, do not. History is not a permission slip. The household also understands that heat feels different depending on where it sits. A warm object near the feet can make the whole body relax. A warm object near the belly can soothe cramps or aches. People learn these effects without medical language. They just learn what feels better. A grandmother might hand a wrapped brick to someone with chills and say nothing more than, "Hold this." That is care, delivered as temperature. Historians still argue whether these portable heating methods were everyday practice for most households, or more common in certain regions, seasons, and economic levels. Some evidence suggests they are widespread and routine, especially where winters are harsh and houses are drafty. Other evidence suggests that for the poorest households, even small extras like spare cloth for wrapping or time to pre-warm objects could be limited. The debate is not about whether the trick exists, but about how often it shows up in the lives of people who had little margin. The truth likely shifts from village to village, like weather. The night deepens, you feel the wrapped stone at your feet, and it is not blazing. It is steady, a slow pulse. The rest of the bed might cool at the edges, but that warm pocket convinces your muscles to unclench. Your toes stop sending emergency messages. Your breathing slows. You stop thinking about the cold as an enemy and start treating it like a background noise. Like a distant dog that is still annoyed but too far away to bite. And because humans cannot resist making even comfort a little funny, you picture someone presenting this idea at a modern gadget expo, introducing the latest sleep technology, the warm rock, no charging cable, no app, no subscription, just a stone. The crowd is confused. The villagers are asleep. The warmth continues to seep out of its dense core, and you let it do its quiet work. The room is still winter, the bed is still simple, but you have a small yet portable sun wrapped in cloth near your feet, and that is enough to make the night feel negotiable. You lie still long enough to notice that warmth is not only something you place around yourself, it is something you wear. The village night does not reward the modern habit of dramatically throwing off all clothing like you're starring in a perfume commercial. The air is too practical for that, so you become familiar with what might be called sleep armour, a set of choices that turns your own body into a better furnace. The first piece is the nightcap. It looks humble, like a soft little dome with no ambition, but it earns its keep. Hair can hold dampness from the day, and dampness is a quiet thief. A cap keeps that dampness from cooling your scalp and it reduces heat loss from the head. The cap also protects from tiny drafts that creep down from the roof space. You might not feel a draft in the middle of the room, but your ears will feel it. Ears, it turns out, are sensitive informants. Socks are next, and the household treats them with the respect you normally reserve for charging cables. Warm feet help the whole body stay comfortable. Cold feet can keep you awake with a stubborn, bright alertness that feels like your toes are sending telegrams. Wool socks, if available, are especially prized. Wool keeps warmth even when the air is damp, which is useful in houses where breath and cooking moisture linger. If the household cannot spare wool for socks, they use what they have: layered cloth, repurposed pieces, sometimes foot wraps. The goal is not elegance, the goal is sleep. Then there is the shirt, often kept on. A long linen shirt is common in many places, and linen has a particular feel. Cool at first, then calm, then surprisingly comfortable once your body warms it. Over that, someone may add a woolen layer if the cold demands it. You're not dressing for style. You're dressing for a long stationary hour when your body temperature can dip. It is the difference between strolling and camping. If you have ever gone camping and thought, "I will just sleep in a t-shirt," you already know how this ends. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly here. Many people in pre-modern villages slept in some form of clothing, often because rooms were cold, because privacy was limited, and because clothing itself was valuable and kept close at hand. Stripping completely would mean exposing skin to cold air and leaving garments in places where dampness, pests, or theft could reach them. Clothing stays near the body because the body is the safest cupboard, but the clothing is chosen with care. A garment that is too tight can restrict circulation and make you feel colder. A garment that is too loose can bunch and create uncomfortable pressure points. So people develop preferences that sound oddly modern. A cap that fits but does not squeeze. Socks that are thick but not binding. A shirt that is long enough to cover the hips. You can almost hear someone offering advice in the dark, the original sleep influencer, except their content is unmonetized, and their ring light is a fire. Now you discover a subtle tactic, keeping one set of clothing specifically for night. If the household can afford it, they avoid sleeping in the same clothes worn all day outside. Day clothing picks up dampness from work, rain, sweat, and mud, and dampness makes the night colder. So a dry sleeping shirt or dry wraps become a small luxury, a way to start the night without carrying the day's chill into bed. Even a poor household might try to at least dry the day shirt by the hearth before wearing it to sleep. It is a quiet form of comfort, like putting on a warm hoodie that smells faintly of smoke and home. There is also the idea of covering the neck, a scarf, a small wrap. Even a fold of cloth tucked into the collar can reduce that feeling of cold air sliding down your chest. The body is sensitive to drafts in certain spots, and the neck is one of them. People notice this without needing any explanation. You can watch someone tuck cloth under their chin the way you might tuck a blanket under your shoulders, and the relief is immediate. A quirky tidbit appears when you consider sleeping posture. People often sleep in ways that conserve warmth. Curled slightly, knees drawn up, arms close. It is not a dramatic fetal pose. It is a gentle gathering inward, reducing exposed surface area. In colder settings, two sleepers might face each other, sharing warmth in the small space between them. It looks intimate, and sometimes it is, but it is also the plain mathematics of heat. You are a walking radiator. At night you become a curled radiator. Some families also use what could be called head and shoulder hoods, especially in harsher climates, where a person might wrap the head and shoulders in a single piece of cloth, leaving only part of the face uncovered. It is the cozy cousin of a travel cloak. The effect is immediate. Your breath warms the small pocket of air, and the fabric slows the exchange with the room. You do, however, need to avoid burying your nose completely because waking up with a wet scarf is not the charming historical detail you want. Historians still argue whether sleeping in clothing is primarily about warmth or primarily about modesty, especially in crowded homes. The answer probably depends on the household and the season. In some cases, warmth is the obvious reason. In others, privacy and custom weigh heavily, especially when the sleeping area is shared. It is difficult to separate these motives because people rarely write diaries saying, "I wore socks for both warmth and social norms." They just wore the socks. The night also teaches you that sweating is not your friend. If you overdress, you can sweat, and sweat cools you later, making you colder at the worst possible time, around dawn. So the smartest households aim for a steady warmth, not a roasting. They adjust, a cap on, then off, a blanket pulled up, then folded down, a leg uncovered for a moment if you feel too hot. It is temperature management by instinct, like adjusting a blanket in your sleep without waking fully. The body knows what it wants. It just needs materials that respond. You can feel the cumulative effect of these choices. The cap softens the cold at your ears. The socks make your feet less dramatic. The shirt keeps a consistent layer of warmth across your torso. The wrap at your neck blocks a draft that would otherwise wake you. The posture keeps your core warm. None of it is glamorous. All of it is effective. And here comes your small sleepy joke for the night. Modern people buy expensive weighted blankets for comfort, and village families invent the same emotional security by wearing a hat to bed and calling it Tuesday. You settle into the idea that the body is not helpless. It is a heat maker. Clothing and wraps are the simple technology that lets the heat stay with you long enough to drift into sleep. The room can be cold, the night can be long, but you are dressed for it, not as a fashion statement, but as a quiet promise to your future self that you will wake up intact. You notice something that feels almost too obvious, the way a good survival trick always does. When the world is cold, you do not try to warm the whole world, you make your world smaller. Village families learn this early, and the house itself becomes a set of choices about what spaces deserve heat, and what spaces can be sacrificed to the night. You stand in the dim interior and realise that the largest room is not automatically the sleeping room. A big room is hard to heat, warm air disperses, drafts find more surface to pull warmth away, and every corner becomes a cold pocket that quietly wins. So people compress their lives into the warmest zone, treating unused space as storage rather than living area. At least in winter, a spare room might exist, but it is not a place you casually hang out for fun. It is more like a refrigerator you do not open unless you have to. The easiest way to shrink a space is to close it off. Doors get shut. If there are no doors, there are curtains, boards, or hanging cloth. A thick textile can divide a room into warm and less warm halves. It is not soundproof, and it is not stylish, but it interrupts airflow. And airflow is the enemy of comfort. You feel the difference when you step behind such a hanging. The air becomes stiller. Your skin stops registering the tiny movement that makes cold feel sharper. A mainstream historical fact fits here. Many traditional homes rely on a central multi-purpose room, with most daily activities clustered around the main heat source. While other spaces are used minimally in colder months, floor plans, furniture placement, and seasonal routines are all shaped by the cost of fuel and the difficulty of warming multiple rooms. People do not talk about it as zoning, they just live it. You start to notice small architectural habits that support this shrinking. Low ceilings help keep heat where people are. Smaller windows, when present, reduce heat loss, especially when glass is rare and coverings are simple. Thick walls, especially stone or packed earth, can slow temperature changes, though they can also feel cold if they have absorbed chill for days. In timber houses, the walls might be easier to warm, but they can leak air through gaps if not well sealed. The household chooses the best compromise available, and then they keep adjusting. Night routiners play into this strategy. As darkness comes, people stop moving between spaces. There is a final round of tasks that must be done, and then the house settles into a smaller footprint. Water is brought closer, tools are placed within reach, food is set where it can be accessed without crossing a cold room. Even the chamber pot, if used, is kept near the sleeping area because nobody wants a midnight walk across a freezing floor unless they enjoy suffering as a hobby. You also notice that people cluster not only in the warmest room, but in the warmest part of that room. The sleeping place might be tucked near an interior wall rather than an exterior one. It might be near the hearth, but not so near that sparks become a problem. It might be in a corner where a piece of furniture blocks a draft. The household learns the microclimate of the room, the way you learn where the sun hits your living room in the afternoon. It becomes instinct. A quirky tidbit shows up in how people treat furniture. A bench or a chest is not just storage. It is a windbreak. If a draft comes under a door, a chest can be positioned to interrupt it. If a wall leaks cold air, a cabinet pushed against it can create a buffer zone. Even stacked baskets can reduce airflow. The house becomes a puzzle that you solve with objects you already own. It is like interior design. If interior design had a single theme, stop the cold from touching me. Sometimes the shrinking is literal. In some places, people sleep in spaces that feel almost too small for comfort. Alcoves, built-in beds, nook beds, anything that reduces cubic air. You might think small means claustrophobic, but small also means controllable. Your body warms the air faster, your breath and blankets build a stable temperature, you feel less exposed. The trade-off is that you share more air with yourself and others, and the smell of smoke and wool and people becomes part of the atmosphere. If you like candle-scented anything, this is the original version, except the scent notes are soot and livestock. Historians still argue how much winter routines changed the use of domestic space in different regions. Some argue that seasonal shifting was dramatic, with families almost migrating within their own homes, abandoning certain rooms for months. Others point out that in many peasant cottages, There is barely any extra space to abandon, so the seasonal difference is more about how the main room is arranged rather than which room is used. Both can be true, depending on wealth, climate, and local building traditions. Another piece of the smaller world strategy is reducing air exchange with the outdoors. That sounds obvious, but you see how deliberate it becomes. A door might have a hanging cloth on the inside, a second layer of defence. Window coverings might be thicker at night. Gaps near the threshold might be stuffed with rags. If there is a loft space where warm air rises, some houses use it, turning the loft into a warmer sleeping area. But lofts can also be drafty if the roof is leaky. So a loft is only warm when the building is tight enough to keep that heat from being stolen by the night. You learn that social life shrinks too. Visitors do not stay late. Conversations shorten. The night is treated like a time when the house should be quiet and closed. This is partly custom, partly safety, partly the simple truth that walking outside in the cold is unpleasant. The village becomes still, and each household becomes its own small island of muted warmth. Your mind drifts to modern life where people heat entire empty rooms for no reason other than forgetting to close a vent. The village version would consider that a personal insult to the concept of effort. Someone would look at your glowing empty guest room and silently judge you, which is honestly fair. You settle into this small warm zone and feel your body relax as the air stops moving so much. Cold is not only temperature, cold is motion. Still air feels kinder. The house is quieter when fewer spaces are in use. The darkness feels less vast when your living area has been reduced to the essentials: a bed, a few blankets, a nearby shelf, a cluster of people and objects that mark the boundaries of comfort. And so you discover that one of the most effective ways to stay warm without a fireplace is not a gadget, not a special trick, not a miracle fuel. It is simply the decision to live in a smaller world for the night, closing off what you cannot afford to warm and keeping your warmth close, like a secret you protect with doors, cloth, and habit. You settle into the quiet and discover the most powerful heater in the room is not made of metal or stone. It breathes, it shifts. It occasionally steals the blanket with the confidence of someone who pays rent. Body heat is the village's most reliable nightly fuel, and it comes with two important features. It is renewable, and it complains if you ignore it. A cold night makes people practical about sleeping arrangements. Privacy becomes flexible. Comfort becomes communal. You see how beds are used like shared resources, not personal kingdoms. Children sleep together in a pile that looks chaotic but functions like a living quilt. Older siblings become human walls that block drafts. Smaller bodies tuck into the warmest centre spots, because the household is not running a fairness committee. It is running a survival program. Adults sometimes share beds for the same reason. A couple shares warmth, obviously, but even beyond couples, there are times when visitors, relatives, or workers might share sleeping space. The modern idea of each person owning their own mattress like a personal identity is not universal here. When the air is cold, empty space in a bed is wasted space, and wasted space is basically a crime against warmth. A mainstream historical fact belongs right in the middle of this. Overcrowding in rural homes is common in many periods, and shared sleeping is not unusual, especially among children and among households with limited rooms and limited bedding. Beds, blankets, and enclosed sleeping spaces are expensive. The warmest choice is often to combine bodies and textiles rather than spreading everyone out like decorative pillows. You feel the physics of it immediately. 2 bodies under 1 blanket can warm a pocket of air faster than 1 body alone. 3 bodies can do it faster still. The blanket becomes more effective because there is more heat to trap under it. The same layer of wool now covers more total warmth. It is not romantic. It is thermodynamics with elbows. The household also makes small decisions that improve the efficiency of this body heat economy. People sleep close enough that gaps do not open between them. If someone rolls away in their sleep, a parent might gently pull them back, not as a cuddle demand, but as a heat management correction. If a child kicks off a blanket, someone tucks it back without fully waking. This is the kind of care that happens half asleep, like a hand reaching for a cup of water without turning on a light. You notice how the group arranges itself. Stronger sleepers, people who tend to stay still, might be placed near the edges, acting as stable barriers. wigglier sleepers, the ones who toss, might be placed where their movement causes less draft. The smallest might be placed between larger bodies, protected on both sides. It is not spoken aloud like a strategy meeting. It is learned through years of cold nights and cranky mornings. There is also a quiet hierarchy of blankets. The thickest, warmest blanket might go where it does the most good, covering the group core. Thinner coverings might be layered on top, or used by those who generate more heat naturally. A person who always runs hot. The medieval version of your friend who wears shorts in winter. Might get fewer layers without protest. A person who chills easily might be given the warmest spot. Warmth is distributed by observation. You can almost hear the household's internal notes. That one shivers, that one does not. A quirky tidbit appears in how some communities treat communal sleeping spaces almost like the evening version of a public bench. In certain inns and crowded lodgings, multiple travellers can share a large sleeping platform, each with their own blanket or wrap, packed together for warmth. It sounds strange in modern ears, but when you think of it as a heat-saving arrangement, it becomes easier to understand. You are not buying luxury. You are buying a warm corner in a human cluster. If you want privacy, you pay more. If you want warmth, you accept that someone nearby snores like a small thunder god. Now you become aware of smell. Because smell is always part of real history. A cluster of sleepers shares breath, wool, smoke, and the day's labour. The air inside the bedding is warm, slightly damp, and thick with human presence. Some people would find that comforting. Others would call it an unlicensed sauna. Either way, it is real, and it comes with a benefit. That slightly humid warmth can feel less biting than dry cold air, even if it is not exactly the fresh mountain breeze of your dreams. The group heat strategy also shapes bedtime behaviour. People eat, then move towards sleep with minimal wandering. Movement creates air currents. It lets cold rush into warm pockets. So once the bedding is settled, and the bodies are arranged, the household tries to stay settled. Even conversation softens quickly, because talking means shifting, and shifting means drafts. The night becomes a still life of warmth conservation. Of course, humans are humans, so this system has flaws. Someone will inevitably hog the blanket. Someone will twitch. Someone will talk in their sleep and accuse a sibling of stealing cheese. You will hear a muffled argument that lasts exactly 8 seconds and ends with a resigned sigh. That sigh is the village's official nighttime currency. Here is the first gentle joke. You think modern family group chats are chaotic until you witness the ancient version, which is 3 children silently negotiating blanket borders with their knees. Even pets can become part of the body heat plan. A dog curling at the foot of the bed is a heat source and a draft blocker. Cats, if they exist in the household, will aim for the warmest possible spot with the confidence of tiny aristocrats. A cat will choose the warmest lap and act as if it invented warmth itself. This is not a new behaviour. This is an eternal behaviour. You also notice that shared warmth affects how people perceive the cold. If you sleep alone in a cold room, every chill feels personal, like the universe picked you. If you sleep in a cluster, cold becomes something outside the group, something you collectively resist. The psychological effect matters. People feel safer when they are close. Safety relaxes the body. Relaxation makes it easier to fall asleep. Sleep, in turn, keeps you from fixating on every shiver. Warmth is not only a temperature, it is a mood. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping arrangements were mostly driven by economic necessity, or whether they were also shaped by cultural ideas of family closeness and normalcy. Some scholars emphasize the hard limits of housing size and textile scarcity. Others point out that in many societies, the expectation of shared sleeping is simply standard. Even when a household could potentially separate, the debate matters because it changes how we imagine daily life. Was this closeness a forced compromise, or was it an accepted default that felt ordinary? The answer shifts by place and time, like so many domestic truths. You listen to the quiet breaths around you and notice another practical advantage. A group is easier to keep an eye on. A parent can sense a child's fever or restlessness. A sibling can hear coughing. Someone can respond quickly if a blanket slips or a child wakes frightened. Warmth and watchfulness merge. The bed becomes a small community, not just a sleeping surface. Here is the second gentle joke. If you think you are a light sleeper, try sleeping next to a person who snores like a sawmill, and then remember you are not allowed to complain because they are your heating system. Eventually the group settles into a rhythm. Breathing synchronizes slightly. The warm pocket under the blankets becomes stable, a steady temperature that no single body could create as easily. The edges of the bedding are cooler, but the core stays calm. You feel how the night stops being an argument and becomes a background. And here is the third gentle joke. Very soft, very sleepy. Modern people pay for heated blankets, and village families achieve the same effect by adding one extra cousin. You let your shoulders drop, the shared warmth holds you. The room remains winter, but the bed is a small continent of heat, shaped by bodies, blankets, and the unspoken agreement that tonight you all keep each other alive and reasonably comfortable. You drift with the simple truth that warmth is sometimes made by tools, but often made by togetherness. And the old village understands that without needing to say it out loud, you wake just enough to notice a sound that is not human breathing. It is heavier, slower, and oddly comforting, like a bellows that never stops. The village is full of the living heat sources, and you do not have to imagine them. You can smell them. Animals give off warmth constantly, and village families learn to place that warmth where it helps, without turning the home into a chaotic petting zoo at midnight. The first arrangement is simple. Livestock are kept close, not in the modern sense of a pet-friendly home, but in the sense of survival. In many villages, animals are housed in attached structures, in byres, stables, or pens that share walls with the human living space. The animal space is often lower, with the human space above or beside it. That design can reduce heat loss and allow some warmth to rise into the human area. You can feel it, a faint but real difference, as if the floor itself is less hostile. A mainstream historical fact sits here. In various parts of Europe and elsewhere, mixed-use buildings or arrangements where humans and animals share a structure are documented, especially in colder regions and in settings where protecting livestock from theft and weather is critical. Keeping animals close also means easier feeding and milking in bad weather, but the warmth is part of the practical package. You step near the dividing wall and notice how heat behaves. A large animal produces a steady amount of body heat through the night. A cow is basically a slow, calm heater with opinions. Sheep are smaller heaters, but many of them together create a warm mass. Even a few animals can reduce the chill in an attached space, especially when the building is tight enough to keep that warmth from immediately escaping. The animal breath adds humidity too, which can make the air feel less sharply cold, though it comes with its own sensory consequences. Those consequences arrive immediately in your nose. The smell is real. It is not romantic. It is a mixture of hay, manure, damp wool, and animal breath, plus the smoky undertone of the human hearth. You realise that the phrase rustic charm has been doing a lot of dishonest work, but the people here do not treat the smell as a scandal. They treat it as part of the cost of keeping everyone alive through winter. You can dislike it and still respect the logic. Animals also add noise. Hooves shift. A goat bleats at nothing. A cow exhales in a long sigh that sounds like it is judging your life choices. The household becomes used to these sounds, and over time they turn into the same kind of background hum you get from a refrigerator. If you grew up near animals, you know that their night noises can feel oddly safe, like proof that the world is still functioning. Now you discover how carefully the household manages boundaries. Animals are not simply allowed to wander among sleeping people, at least not the big ones. There are partitions, gates, low walls, doors. The goal is to capture warmth while preventing chaos. A cow stepping into your sleeping area is not a cozy moment. It is a new religion, so the architecture is designed for control. Humans get the dry, elevated, cleaner space. Animals get the sturdy, easily cleaned space. Heat moves upward and sideways, and the family benefits without sharing blankets with a goat. Mostly, but smaller animals do sometimes cross those boundaries. A cat might sleep near the warmest bodies because cats are excellent at finding the exact temperature of comfort. A dog might curl at the threshold between human and animal spaces. acting as a draft stopper and an alarm. Poultry might be kept indoors in very cold spells, tucked into baskets or corners, because freezing kills quickly and eggs are valuable. A chicken in the house is not a cute farm influencer moment. It is a financial decision that also clucks. A quirky tidbit appears in how people use animals as warm objects, gently, carefully, without treating them like tools. In some places, people sleep with a small animal near their feet, like a dog, to add warmth. You might hear a story about someone keeping a lamb inside during a particularly hard winter. These moments exist, though they vary by culture and household. The animal is not a hot water bottle. It is a living thing that also wants warmth. The arrangement can be mutually beneficial, even if your modern brain initially says, "This is weird." The relationship between warmth and animals also shapes clothing. Wool is a gift from sheep, and it becomes one of the best insulating materials available. That is not just a nice fact. It changes life. Wool blankets, wool caps, wool socks, wool outer layers, all come from the animals kept close. So animals warm the house in two ways, directly through their bodies and indirectly through the materials they provide. You can trace a line from a sheep in the pen to the blanket on the bed. And it is a line made of labour, shearing, spinning, weaving, and patience. Historians still argue how much of a household's warmth came from animal proximity versus fire management and bedding strategies. Some argue that animal heat made a meaningful difference in certain building types, especially where humans slept above stables. Others suggest the effect is modest unless the structure is very well built and the animal area is large. The debate is partly about architecture and partly about climate, because heat moves differently in a damp, mild winter than in a sharp, dry one. Either way, people clearly valued the arrangement enough to build around it. You also learn that animals are a form of security. A house that contains livestock is less likely to lose them to theft. Winter theft can be brutal because food is scarce and desperation rises. Keeping animals in or near the home protects them and keeps the family's wealth close. That security reduces stress, and reduced stress helps people sleep. It is not warmth in degrees, but it is warmth in the nervous system. Safety is a blanket too, just an invisible one. There is a practical routine connected to this. Before sleep, someone checks the animals, adjusts bedding straw, ensures water is not frozen, closes the gates, and listens for signs of illness. Sick animals mean lost milk, lost meat, lost wool, and the loss can cascade. So the household's night is partly a watch over the living heaters and living assets. The animals, in return, keep breathing warmth into the building. Here is your first light joke. Modern people buy smart thermostats, and village families buy a cow. And the cow controls the temperature by existing loudly. You feel the warmth difference when you lean your hand toward a wall shared with the animal space. The wall is not hot. It is simply less cold. That matters. Cold is often about surfaces that steal heat from you. A less cold wall means less heat theft. It is subtle, but over a whole night, subtle becomes significant. Here is your second light joke. If you ever wanted to know what open concept living really feels like, imagine your bedroom sharing a wall with a goat that has opinions at 3 a.m. And your third light joke, very gentle. The original space heater is not a machine. It is a sheep, and it comes with free lint. You settle again, listening to the steady animal breathing, and the night feels less empty. Warmth is not a single source. It is a system. It includes bodies, blankets, walls, and the quiet presence of animals nearby, turning feed into heat with the slow efficiency that nature perfected long before humans invented radiators. The village does not romanticize it. The village simply uses it, and you, tucked into your sleeping space, feel that borrowed warmth rise through the structure like a calm, steady tide. You lie in the dark long enough to notice a truth that feels slightly rude. Warmth and clean air are not always friends. When a house is built to hold heat, it also holds smoke, and village families spend generations learning how to live inside that compromise without turning every night into a coughing contest. This is the part of warmth that nobody puts on a postcard, mostly because the postcard would smell. Some homes do not have a proper chimney. Instead, the hearth smoke rises into the room and finds its way out through gaps in the roof, through a smoke hole, or through porous thatch. The room becomes hazy at times, especially when the fire is lively or when the weather presses air downward. You can taste a faint bitterness in the air. Your eyes might sting. The household treats this as ordinary. They have learned to exist in layers of smoke the way modern people exist in layers of screen light. A mainstream historical fact fits here. For long stretches of time and in many rural regions, domestic smoke management is rudimentary, and the development of effective chimneys spreads unevenly. Some houses adopt chimneys earlier, especially in wealthier contexts, while others rely on smoke hoods, vents, or simply leaky roofs. The result is that indoor air can be smoky for many households, especially during winter when fires burn more. Now you see the strange benefits of smoke. Smoke discourages insects and pests. A smoky roof space can keep beams and thatch less hospitable to bugs. Smoke also helps preserve certain foods when meat or fish is hung in the upper part of the room. In some houses, the rafters are a storage zone, and smoke turns storage into preservation. So the same smoke that makes your throat grumble also protects the household's food supply and materials. The house is doing multiple jobs at once, and none of the jobs are polite. You notice how people position themselves to avoid the worst of it. There are smoke layers, thicker near the ceiling, thinner closer to the floor. Depending on airflow and roof design, people learn where the sweet spot is, the band of air that is warm enough but not too smoky. They sit and sleep in that band. Children, being shorter, might actually breathe cleaner air than adults in a smoky house, which is one of those accidental advantages you would never plan but will accept. Meanwhile, the adults develop a legendary tolerance and a voice that sounds like it has been seasoned over a fire for years. The household also practices fire control in a way that doubles as smoke control. A steady bed of coals produces less smoke than a roaring, resinous flame, so the fuel choice matters. Dry wood burns cleaner than damp wood. Peat can produce its own heavy smell. Dung fuel can burn steadily, but with a distinctive aroma that announces itself confidently. The household uses what it has, but it also learns how to dry fuel, how to store it, and how to avoid the smokiest options when possible. This is not environmentalism, this is comfort and lung survival. A quirky tidbit appears in the way some homes intentionally use soot. Soot darkens interior surfaces, and while that sounds unpleasant, it can have a slight heat-absorbing effect on surfaces that catch firelight and radiant heat. Darkened surfaces can warm a little more readily than bright reflective ones. People do not talk about thermal absorption coefficients. They just live in rooms that slowly turn black, and those rooms feel like they belong to winter. Soot also seals tiny cracks in thatch over time, making the roof slightly less leaky. The house gradually becomes its own smoke-cured container. Of course, soot is also a mess. It coats clothing, bedding, and skin. People wake up with a faint smoky smell in their hair. Laundry becomes harder because the soot clings. You start to understand why washing is a major task and why some households develop a complicated relationship with cleanliness. It is not that they do not care. It is that the environment keeps reapplying the smoke-scented layer nightly. Some houses have early chimneys or flues, but even those are imperfect. A chimney draws better when the fire is hot and the air outside allows upward movement. On damp, still nights, smoke can hang or backdraft. If the chimney is poorly built, it leaks smoke into the walls or roof. If it is clogged, it becomes dangerous. Chimneys can also waste heat if they draw too strongly, pulling warm air out of the room like a greedy vacuum. So the household manages airflow carefully, sometimes blocking parts of the opening or adjusting vents, aiming for the narrow balance between breathing and freezing. Historians still argue about how smoky ordinary interiors truly were across different centuries and regions. Some evidence suggests that many homes are indeed heavily smoke-filled, with soot thick on rafters and walls, and that chronic smoke exposure is common. Other evidence suggests that households develop effective ventilation practices, that building designs improve over time, and that the worst smoke conditions may be more typical of certain periods or poorer homes. The debate matters because it changes how we imagine daily comfort. Was the home a warm refuge that just smelled smoky, or a semi-enclosed smokehouse that people endured? The answer shifts with architecture, fuel, climate, and local knowledge. You learn that people also adapt biologically and behaviourally. They keep low. They face away from the smoke stream. They blink more. They develop routines like stepping outside briefly to clear the lungs, even in the cold. They may use herbs or warm drinks to soothe irritated throats, not because they know the chemistry, but because they know what feels better. A warm broth is not only calories, it is also a soft reset for a throat that has inhaled yesterday's fire. Here is your first light joke. The original scented candle is just living indoors, and the scent is campfire with hints of existential realism. There are risks that are taken seriously. Too much smoke in an enclosed space can be dangerous. People learn to recognise the heavy, stale feeling of bad air. They learn to crack a door, adjust a vent, or reduce the fire. They also learn the risk of sleeping too close to smouldering embers in a tightly sealed space. The household wants warmth, but it also wants everyone to wake up. The line between comfort and danger is thin, and winter does not forgive. Here is your second light joke. If you ever complain that your apartment smells like cooking, imagine your house smelling like fire as a permanent personality trait. And your third light joke, softer now. A village family does not need air freshener because the air is already freshly smoked. In the end, smoke becomes part of the warmth story because it is the shadow cast by the hearth. People accept it, manage it, and sometimes even use it. They sleep with the faint taste of it in the air, with soot on the beams, with the knowledge that warmth comes from burning something, and burning something makes smoke. The night holds them in that compromise, and they respond with routines, placement, and the quiet skill of choosing the least bad option. You breathe slowly, keeping your face in the cleanest band of air you can find, and the room feels both ancient and honest. Warmth is not free, it is earned, and sometimes it is earned in a haze that makes the darkness feel thicker, like the night itself has been smoked and cured for winter. You shift a foot and feel the cold rise from below like it has been waiting politely for its turn. Floors are sneaky, walls and air get all the attention, but the ground is a patient thief that can pull warmth out of you all night without making a sound. Village families learn that keeping warm is not only about what surrounds you, it is also about what separates you from the earth. The simplest answer is to cover the floor. That sounds obvious until you realise how much labour goes into it. A bare packed earth floor is common in many rural houses for long periods. It is practical and cheap, but it holds damp and cold. Stone floors are durable, but they can feel like sleeping on winter itself. Wood floors can be warmer, but wood takes resources and skill. So whatever the floor is made of, people add layers on top because layers interrupt heat transfer. A mainstream historical fact fits here. Floor coverings like rushes, straw, and later rugs are widely used in many regions to improve comfort and insulation, especially in winter. In some medieval contexts, floors are strewn with rushes or straw, sometimes mixed with fragrant herbs, and these layers are replaced periodically. The covering reduces drafts, adds a bit of cushioning, and creates a barrier between feet and cold ground. You step onto a floor strewn with rushes and immediately feel the difference. It is not plush. It is not a modern carpet that makes you feel like you should take your shoes off and whisper. It is a practical mat of plant stems that trap air and keep your soles from touching the cold surface directly. Air is a good insulator when it is trapped. Rushes trap it in thousands of tiny pockets. The floor becomes less of a heat sink and more of a neutral surface. Straw does similar work, especially where straw is abundant after harvest. It is lighter, fluffier, and it can feel surprisingly cosy underfoot, at least until it gets dirty. In a busy household, it gets dirty quickly. You learn that winter comfort is always negotiating with mess. The household sweeps, replaces, and manages the floor layer the way you manage bedding, by routine. It is not an occasional deep clean. It is maintenance, like feeding a fire. In some places, you find hides and skins used as floor coverings. A cured hide is a barrier against cold and damp. It is also a valuable object. It might be placed where people sit, where children play, or near the sleeping area. It can be draped over a bench or laid under a bed. If you touch it, You feel how it blocks the chill more effectively than plants alone, especially if the hide still has some thickness. The smell is earthy and animal, a reminder that warmth often comes from livestock in more ways than one. Now you notice how floors interact with drafts. Cold air slips in low, under doors, through gaps at the base of walls. That cold air moves along the floor first, so a thick floor covering does not only insulate against the ground, it also disrupts that creeping airflow. A pile of rushes or a rolled textile can act like a draft dam, slowing the cold's quiet march across the room. You can picture the cold trying to sneak in and hitting a wall of straw like a disappointed villain. A quirky tidbit appears in the way people scent the floor coverings. Herbs like lavender or sweet woodruff, or other local plants might be mixed in with rushes, partly for smell, partly to discourage insects. It is not always as romantic as it sounds, because the herbs are battling the scent of smoke, animals and human life. But the intention matters. People want the home to feel less harsh. They want winter to be a little less sharp in the nose. You can imagine someone sprinkling herbs and feeling, for a moment, like they have control over something. You also see how seating and sleeping are adjusted to avoid floor cold. People sit on benches rather than directly on the ground. Beds are raised. Sleeping platforms might be built on wooden frames. Even a simple pallet is often placed on something, a layer of boards, a pile of straw, a thick mat. This is not only for comfort, it is because the ground steals heat quickly. A body on a cold surface loses warmth faster than a body surrounded by air and cloth. The household learns this in their bones, literally. Historians still argue about how clean or dirty these floor coverings typically were, and how often they were changed, especially in poorer households. Some accounts suggest regular replacement, especially in homes that value a tidy interior. Other evidence suggests that in many places, floor litter can accumulate, becoming a mix of plant material, dirt, and household debris, especially during winter when people spend more time indoors and cleaning is harder. The debate is partly about economic capacity and partly about cultural norms. Some communities prioritise frequent renewal, others prioritise using every resource until it is truly spent. You notice one more clever trick, using the floor covering to store warmth. If a fire has burned during the evening, the floor near it can hold a bit of radiant warmth. Thick coverings can absorb and slowly release that warmth, especially if they are dry. If they are damp, they become cold sponges instead. So dryness is key. This is why the household cares about keeping wet boots away from certain areas, and why they hang wet clothing rather than letting it drip onto the floor. Dampness is not only discomfort, it is a heat assassin. Here is your first light joke. The original heated floor system is called straw, and it comes with bonus crunch sounds when you sneak to the water bucket. And the second light joke. Modern rugs are expensive, but at least they do not occasionally try to become compost in your living room. And the third light joke, very gentle. If you ever wondered why people in old stories shuffle instead of stride, it is because stepping on icy floor feels like signing a contract you did not read. The floor strategy also affects morning life. When you wake, your first contact is the ground. If the floor is covered and insulated, getting up is less of a shock. If it is bare and cold, you delay rising, because stepping onto winter is not motivational. So a well-covered floor makes the household more functional. It reduces misery. That matters because winter days require work, and work requires a body that is not already angry from the ankles up. You feel your own feet relax as the cold stops biting through the soles. The floor becomes a calmer surface. The room feels less like a cave and more like a lived-in place. The coverings are humble, but they transform the experience of a night. They stop the ground from pulling warmth out of your body as you sleep. They tame the drafts that skim along the base of the walls. They add a soft buffer between you and the hard reality of winter. You settle again, grateful for every layer between you and the earth. The night remains cold beyond the walls, but inside, the floor no longer feels like an open invitation to shiver. It feels managed. It feels intentionally softened. It feels like another quiet way village families keep warm without needing a grand fireplace. By simply refusing to let the cold climb up from under them, you listen to the wind outside and realize it is not only outside, It wants to be inside. It tests every seam of the house like fingers searching for an opening in a village home without a modern fireplace. The most important warmth skill is not only making heat, but keeping the cold from entering in the first place. This is the craft of walls, gaps, and quick winter fixes, the kind of repairs that never make songs, yet keep people sleeping. You begin with the simplest enemy, the crack. Timber shrinks and swells, wattle and daub dries and shifts, stone walls settle, thatch moves. Every material ages, and every age creates a gap. Drafts slide through those gaps and turn a room into a slow-moving stream of cold air. Village families learn to treat gaps as emergencies, not because the house will fall down, but because their comfort will. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Many traditional buildings use wattle and daub, timber framing, stone, or packed earth, and these structures require ongoing maintenance, especially around joints and openings, to prevent drafts and water intrusion. Seasonal repairs are part of rural life, and winter motivates them with immediate consequences. You watch someone make a repair with whatever is available. Moss is pressed into a crack between timbers. Clay is smeared over a seam and patted smooth with a wet hand. Strips of cloth are rolled and stuffed along the base of a door. Straw mixed with mud becomes a quick filler. Materials are humble, but the effect can be dramatic. The draft weakens. The air becomes stiller. Still air holds warmth better, as if the room is finally allowed to rest. Doorways get special attention because a door is a moving part, and moving parts are always a weakness. If the door does not fit tightly, people hang a thick cloth behind it like a second door made of fabric. The cloth absorbs the cold air that squeezes through. It also catches dust, which is less romantic. But dust is not as bad as shivering. If there is a threshold gap, a rolled bundle, a wooden strip, or a stuffed rag plug can block it. You can see the household's logic in action. Stop the cold at the border. Windows, when they exist, are another weak point. In many rural houses, windows can be small, sometimes covered with oiled cloth, shuttered wood, or simple openings that are closed at night. Glass is not always common or affordable. Even when glass exists, it is often small panes set in lead, and the frame can leak air, so shutters become crucial. At night, shutters close, and sometimes additional cloth is hung or stuffed around the edges. You can feel how the room's temperature becomes more stable when the openings are sealed. You also see the roof. A thatched roof can be warm because it is thick, trapping air like a huge blanket over the house. But thatch can leak air if it is thin, damaged, or poorly maintained. Repairs involve adding bundles, tightening layers, and keeping the thatch dense. In a timber roof, gaps between boards can leak, so people patch with tar, clay, or additional layers, depending on local practice. Even the smoke that rises through the roof in some houses can deposit soot that helps seal tiny openings over time. The building becomes gradually more airtight in its own imperfect way. A quirky tidbit appears when you notice how people sometimes use paper. In places where paper is available and affordable enough, it can be used to cover small openings or create layers over window frames. Paper, especially when oiled, can block drafts while letting some light through during the day. It is a fragile solution, but fragile solutions are still solutions. You picture someone carefully smoothing paper over a frame, hoping the wind does not decide to take it personally. Another quick fix is rearrangement. A bed might be moved away from an exterior wall because exterior walls can radiate cold inward. A chest might be placed against the coldest part of a wall to create a buffer zone. Hanging cloth or tapestries can be placed on walls, not only for decoration, but to reduce drafts and cold radiation. Even a pile of stored goods can insulate. The room becomes a winter layout, designed to keep people away from the coldest surfaces and to keep air movement low. Historians still argue how tight typical village houses were across different regions and centuries. Some argue that many cottages are so leaky that indoor temperatures stay only slightly above outdoor levels away from the hearth. Others argue that people become skilled at sealing, that certain building traditions produce surprisingly snug interiors, and that the combination of thick walls, small openings, and continuous maintenance can create a relatively stable indoor climate. The debate is also shaped by what survives. A ruined wall tells you little about the cloth that once hung over it, or the moss that was stuffed into its seams. Now you pay attention to the humble art of sealing moisture too. Moisture makes cold feel colder. Damp air conducts heat away from the body more efficiently, and damp materials feel chilly when you touch them. So families try to keep walls dry, roofs sound, and floors covered. They store fuel under cover. They hang wet clothing away from sleeping areas. They keep water buckets where spills will not soak bedding. It is not just about warmth. It is about making sure the warmth does not get sabotaged by wetness. Here is your first light joke. The village version of Home Improvement is not a TV show. It is a person with mud on their hands saying, "This will do." Second light joke. If you think your apartment has drafts, imagine your wall politely offering wind as a feature. Third light joke, soft and sleepy. The original weather stripping is called old cloth, and it has been doing unpaid work for centuries. You feel the difference once the gaps are plugged. The room becomes quieter because drafts make tiny sounds, faint whistles and rustles. When the air stops moving, the silence thickens. The temperature does not suddenly become tropical, but it becomes steady. Steady as everything. A steady room allows blankets and clothing to do their job properly. A steady room allows breath to feel less sharp. A steady room allows sleep to happen without the constant interruption of cold fingers touching your face. You realise that this is warmth as housekeeping, not glamorous, not dramatic, just constant attention to the edges where cold enters. The family's hands know the texture of moss, the stickiness of clay, the shape of a rag rolled into a draft plug. They know which corner always leaks when the wind blows from a certain direction. They know which shutter needs an extra wedge. They know that a house is not a finished object. It is an ongoing relationship with weather. You rest with the feeling that the walls are doing more than standing up. They are working. They are holding a boundary. The night wind can press all it wants. But inside this patched, layered shell, the air remains calmer, and calm air is the beginning of warmth. You feel your stomach make a small request. The quiet kind that sounds like a suggestion but is actually a demand. Warmth is not only around you, it is also inside you. Village families understand this without needing scientific terms, and they plan the evening meal like they are feeding a stove that has to run through the night. The meal is often warm and thick, because thin food disappears too fast. You smell something like pottage, a stew of grains, legumes, vegetables, maybe a bit of meat or salted fish if the household has it. It is not fancy. It is steady. It goes down warm and sits heavy enough to feel like a blanket in your belly. That fullness matters. When your body digests food, it generates heat, and that heat becomes part of your nighttime comfort. You can feel it. A subtle internal glow that makes the cold seem less personal. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. In many rural diets across centuries, evening meals often rely on hearty staples like grains, pulses, and stews, because they are economical, filling, and easy to cook in a single pot. These meals provide calories needed for labour and help the body maintain temperature during cold nights. Fat is especially valued in winter. Fat carries a lot of energy, and energy is warmth you can store. A bit of lard, butter, suet, or oil can transform a bowl of food from sad to sustaining. People might not speak in calories, but they know the difference between a lean meal and one that keeps you warm longer. If you have ever eaten a rich soup and felt your shoulders relax, you already know the ancient lesson. Fat is comfort with a purpose. Warm drinks appear too. Not always tea in the modern sense, but warm ale, warmed milk when available, or herbal infusions. A warm drink raises your temperature briefly and makes it easier to settle. It also hydrates, which helps when indoor air is smoky or dry. Some households avoid drinking too much close to sleep, for obvious reasons involving cold floors and dark rooms. But a small warm cup can be worth it. It is a tiny internal fire, controlled and safe. You notice that timing matters. People try not to go to bed hungry, because hunger can make you feel colder and can keep you awake with a restless emptiness. But they also do not want to eat so much that digestion feels uncomfortable. So the meal is balanced between fullness and ease. A thick stew, some bread, maybe a bit of cheese, maybe a small sweet if there is honey or dried fruit. The point is steadiness. A quirky tidbit slips in with the bedtime snack. In some households, a small piece of bread might be saved for later in the night or early morning, especially for children. A child who wakes cold can be calmed by a bite of food. The bite is not only calories, as it is reassurance. It tells the body you are safe enough to eat. That lowers stress, and lower stress helps the body hold warmth. You can almost hear the quiet rustle of bread in the dark and the hush of someone saying, "Chew slowly." Salted foods play their own role. Salted meat, salted fish, preserved cheese, these are winter supplies. They bring protein and fat, but they can also make you thirstier. The household knows this and often pairs salty foods with porridge or stew to balance the effect. It is not nutrition science, it is experience. If you eat too salty and then wake thirsty, you are forced to drink and then you are forced to get up. Getting up is the enemy of warmth. Therefore, evening food choices are partly about avoiding unnecessary midnight adventures. You also learn that alcohol is treated with caution and comfort at the same time. A little ale or cider can make you feel warm because it dilates blood vessels and gives a flush. But that can also increase heat loss if you overdo it. People do not talk about vasodilation. They talk about how a drink makes you feel, and how you feel later. Some households use a small warm drink as a comfort. Others avoid it at night because it leads to poor sleep or risky cold trips outside. The night sets its own rules. Historians still argue how much people intentionally used food as a warming strategy versus simply eating what was available. Some scholars suggest that the link between hearty evening meals and winter comfort is strongly recognised in practice, even if not articulated in modern terms. Others caution that scarcity shapes meals more than strategy, and many households may have gone to bed hungry during hard winters, making warmth management far harder. The debate sits between cultural wisdom and economic reality, and both matter. You feel the social ritual of eating too. People gather close, sharing the warmest part of the room while they eat. The pot itself radiates heat. Steam rises. Hands warm around bowls. Eating becomes a heat event as well as nourishment. The room briefly feels more alive. Even the act of stirring and serving keeps people moving just enough to warm their bodies, but not enough to sweat. There are small tricks connected to leftovers. A pot might be kept near embers to stay warm into the evening. A covered vessel might hold warmth for a late serving. If someone wakes early, the hope is that a little warm food can be had without building a full fire. Warmth saved in food is still warmth saved. Here is your first light joke. The village does not have midnight snacks. It has strategic thermal refueling. Second light joke. Modern people count calories and village families count "will this stop me shivering at dawn" units. Third light joke. Gentle. The original comfort food is not a trend. It is survival with a spoon. You settle after eating and feel that internal warmth spreads slowly. Not dramatic, just steady. Your fingers feel less stiff. Your breathing feels deeper. The blankets seem to work better when your body is fueled. It is like the whole system cooperates more easily. A warm meal, a bit of fat, a small warm drink, and your body becomes a more reliable heater, humming quietly through the night. The cold remains outside, doing what cold does, but inside you there is a calm heat generated by digestion and by the simple relief of not being hungry. You let that warmth carry you towards sleep, confident that even without a grand fireplace, a full belly can be its own kind of hearth, gentle and persistent, working from within. You drift in a half-sleep and then notice a different kind of comfort, the sort that feels like a small invention someone made because they were tired of suffering. Villagers do not have factories churning out gadgets, but they do have minds that dislike cold feet. Across regions, people come up with clever gear, each shaped by local materials and habits, and the results can feel surprisingly modern, like you stumbled into an ancient version of a winter catalogue. One of the most famous is the foot warmer. In some places this is a small box, basket, or wooden frame that holds a warm object safely. Sometimes a wrapped heated stone, sometimes a heated brick, sometimes a small container of embers carefully managed. The key is separation. The warm core is kept from direct contact with bedding or skin, and the structure traps warmth around the feet, like a tiny room inside the bed. You slide your feet into it and feel immediate relief, as if someone turned down the cruelty setting. Another device shows up in wealthier homes or in later periods, but can echo into village life through second-hand trade: the bed warmer pan. A metal pan with a long handle is filled with hot coals and passed between the sheets to warm the space before sleeping. It is a simple mechanism with a dramatic risk profile. You can imagine the caution in every movement, the way someone holds their breath as the pan glides, and the way everyone pays attention, because a single mistake is an event nobody wants. It is comfort that demands competence. A mainstream historical fact fits here. Specialised warming tools such as warming pans, foot warmers, and insulated containers become more common as metalworking. Trade and household wealth increase, but even simpler versions exist in many communities using local materials like wood, ceramic, and cloth. The basic idea remains consistent: safely transfer heat from a fire source into the sleeping space. Now you meet the ceramic bottle, jug, or stoneware vessel used as a heat holder. Fill it with hot water, stopper it well, wrap it, and it becomes a steady heater that does not spark. The craft is in the seal. A leaky stopper is a nightmare, because damp bedding is cold bedding, so people learn which vessels are trustworthy, which stoppers swell properly, and how to wrap the bottle so the heat is gentle, not harsh. You can feel how the warmth radiates slowly and predictably, like a calm companion. Some regions favour different methods depending on fuel and climate. In peat-burning areas, the household might have a steady bed of coals that last longer, making ember-based devices easier in places where wood is scarce but animal dung is plentiful. Fuel burns differently, sometimes producing a long steady heat that suits slow warming. In forested regions, there may be more access to wood for heating stones and bricks. The device changes, but the goal stays the same: keep warmth near the body without wasting fuel all night. A quirky tidbit appears in the use of bedpans, and yes, this is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. In some contexts, a covered warming pan or bedpan can be used not only for its intended purpose, but also as a warming tool, filled with warm water and placed near the feet. People repurpose objects because winter does not care about your labelling system. If it holds heat and fits near your legs, it becomes a heater. The humour is obvious, and the practicality is relentless. You also discover regional building features that act like warming gear built into the house. In some areas, masonry stoves or heated benches become part of domestic architecture, allowing heat to be stored in a mass that releases warmth slowly. Even if a household lacks a fancy fireplace, a stove or oven might heat a wall or platform that stays warm into the night. You can sit or sleep near that mass and feel the gentle radiance, different from direct fire heat, more even and less drying. It is like leaning against a sun-warmed stone. But indoors, textile innovations also count as gear. Quilting, where layers of fabric are stitched together to trap air, becomes a powerful warmth technology. So does felting wool, which creates dense, insulating cloth. In some places, people use layered sleeping covers with different materials: linen for comfort against the skin, wool for insulation, and sometimes fur for extra warmth. These are not random choices. They are local engineering, refined by long winters. Historians still argue how widely these specialised devices spread into rural households versus staying concentrated in towns and wealthier homes. Some scholars point to inventories and household records that show warming pans and similar tools present beyond elite circles. Others argue that many villages rely mainly on simpler methods, like stones and extra bedding, and that metal devices remain uncommon where cash and metal goods are scarce. The debate often hinges on what evidence survives, because a wooden foot warmer may rot away while a metal pan lasts and gets recorded. You also notice the role of repair and reuse. A cracked ceramic vessel might be patched. A worn textile is not discarded. It is turned into wrapping cloth for warm stones or into draft blockers. A broken basket might be reinforced and used as a foot warmer frame. The household wastes very little. This makes the gear culture feel creative rather than consumerist. People do not buy solutions. They assemble them. Here is your first light joke. The village does not have a heated blanket setting. It has a wrap the jug better setting. Second light joke. Modern gadgets come with user manuals, and village gear comes with one sentence of advice: do not burn the house down. Third light joke. Soft. The original product review is a neighbour saying to us, "That footbox is nice, my toes stayed attached." As you settle with these tools, you feel how each one changes the experience of a night. A foot warmer concentrates comfort where you feel cold first. A warm water bottle gives steady heat without smoke. A warmed bed makes the first contact less shocking. A heated bench or masonry mass offers a gentle radiance that feels almost luxurious compared to bare air. All of it is built from local knowledge and small ingenuity, passed hand to hand, house to house, winter to winter. You let the warmth do its quiet work, and you sense something tender in it. Not sentimentality, but care. These tools exist because people notice suffering and try to reduce it with whatever they can craft. In the dark, that feels like a kind of kindness you can actually feel, measured in degrees and in the simple relief of not shivering. You wake to a particular kind of cold that does not feel dramatic, just stubborn, like the air has decided to sit on your chest. This is the part of a winter people do not romanticize because it comes with consequences. Warmth fails sometimes. A family misjudges the weather. Fuel runs short. A roof leaks. Someone falls ill. And suddenly the night is not only uncomfortable, it is dangerous in quiet ways. You notice first how the body changes when it cannot keep up. Fingers lose coordination. Your hands feel clumsy, like they belong to someone else. Toes go numb, not from pain, but from absence, which is arguably worse because absence is easy to ignore. A child might not complain much at first, they just become still. Stillness looks like sleep until you learn to recognize the difference between restful quiet and a body conserving energy because it has no choice. A mainstream historical fact sits here, heavy and real. Cold exposure and respiratory illness are common winter problems in pre-modern living conditions, especially in homes with smoke, dampness, and crowded sleeping arrangements. People do not have modern heating, modern insulation, or modern medicine, so small problems can escalate. A lingering cough, a wet garment, a night spent shivering. Any of it can push someone toward weeks of weakness. You hear coughing in the dark, the dry kind that seems to scrape the throat, and you realize how much winter sickness shapes household behavior. Someone with a cough is moved to the warmest place, not because they are being pampered, but because warmth is treatment. Warmth means the body can focus on healing instead of simply maintaining temperature. A sick person might be placed closer to the hearth area or given the thickest blanket. The household may keep a bit of fuel in reserve, even if it is a hard sacrifice, because sickness changes the priorities instantly. Dampness becomes the villain in this room. Wet clothing, wet bedding, wet boots. These are not minor inconveniences. They can turn a mildly cold night into a punishing one. People learn rules that sound like superstition, but are really experience. Do not sleep in wet things. Do not let a child stay damp. Do not ignore a leaky roof. If a blanket gets wet, it is dried as soon as possible, even if that means extra work and extra smoke. The cost of drying is less than the cost of a fever. Frostbite exists too, though in many village homes the bigger threat is prolonged chilling rather than dramatic tissue damage. Still, fingers and toes are vulnerable, especially for people who work outside, walk long distances, or sleep in poorly protected conditions. The earliest warning is numbness, then waxy skin, then pain as circulation returns. People do not have a modern label for it, but they know the pattern. They know to warm slowly, to avoid rubbing too hard, to keep the extremities covered. They also know that pride is expensive. If your hands are going numb, you go inside. You notice how the elderly are treated in this climate. They are often given priority for warmth, because everyone has watched an older body struggle with cold. Children are protected too, because they lose heat quickly. The strongest working adults take the colder spot sometimes, not as heroism, but because the household is a system that tries to keep the most vulnerable functioning. It is a quiet ethics of winter, built from necessity and care. A quirky tidbit appears in the form of warming cures that hover between folk practice and practical comfort. You might see someone rub goose fat on chapped skin and windburned cheeks, partly to soothe, partly to create a barrier against wind. You might see people wrap a scarf over the lower face to warm inhaled air, not because they measured its effects, but because it makes breathing hurt less. You might also hear a remedy involving onions. garlic, or strong herbs, believed to chase illness away. Some of these practices have mild benefits, some are mainly ritual, and some are simply the comfort of doing something when the cold feels too powerful. You also sense the danger of smoke and stale air when the house is sealed tightly against drafts. The need to conserve warmth can collide with the need to breathe cleanly. A smoky night can irritate lungs, and irritated lungs can turn a small cough into a serious problem. Families learn to make small adjustments, cracking a vent, shifting the banked coals, moving sleepers slightly, trying to keep the air just workable enough. The line is thin. You can feel why people become so attentive to small sensations. The taste of smoke, the heaviness of the air, the sting in the eyes. Here is your first light joke, gentle but honest. Winter in a village turns everyone into a full-time building inspector, except the pay is not money. It is toes. The emotional side of danger shows up too. Cold nights make people anxious. A mother listens for a child's breathing. A father checks the roof after a storm. Someone gets up to feel the air near the sleeping area and decide if another layer is needed. These motions are quiet, almost automatic. Worry becomes routine, and routine makes it less sharp. Even fear gets domesticated. There is also the risk of accidents. A warm stone can be too hot, an ember container can tip, a candle can fall, a drunk person can stumble. The household develops rules that feel strict because they are written in memory. Do not bring open flame near straw. Do not leave a pot where a child can pull it. Do not sleep too close to smouldering coals. You can sense how many of these rules are taught through sharp stories, warnings with names attached. The kind of tale that ends with, "and that is why you do not do that." Here is your second light joke. Modern safety labels say, "do not attempt," and village safety labels are your aunt saying, "I will smack you if you try," when the cold really bites. Social support becomes part of survival. Neighbours may share fuel in emergencies. Someone might lend a blanket. A household with extra straw might bring some to an older widow. In extreme weather, people sometimes bring vulnerable individuals into warmer homes for the night. This is not charity as performance. It is community risk management. One death affects everyone. One household's collapse can ripple through labour, childcare, and food sharing. Keeping each other alive is practical. Historians still argue whether winter mortality in rural communities is driven more by cold exposure itself or by the diseases that spread and worsen during winter conditions. Some scholars emphasise that cold stresses the body and makes infection more likely to become severe. Others point to overcrowding indoors, smoke exposure, malnutrition in lean months, and the circulation of respiratory illnesses. The truth is likely tangled, because winter does not deliver problems one at a time. It stacks them. You notice how people try to prevent malnutrition from turning into vulnerability. Food stores are guarded carefully. The household rations, not only to last until spring, but to keep bodies strong enough to endure cold. A person who is underfed feels colder and recovers slower from illness. So winter planning is not just about warmth materials. It is about making sure the human furnace has fuel. Even the poorest households prioritise children's portions when possible, because a child's body has less reserve, less. There is also a cultural layer of winter caution. People avoid unnecessary travel at night. They plan work around daylight. They keep tasks close to home when weather is harsh. They maintain pathways between houses. They store emergency supplies. These habits become tradition, then common sense, then something people do without questioning. You can almost see a calendar of winter behaviour written into the village itself. Quiet streets, early doors shut. A shared understanding that bravado does not impress the weather. Here is your third light joke, soft and sleepy. The village version of extreme sports is fetching water when it is freezing and pretending it is normal. You feel the room settle again, and the danger does not vanish, but it becomes managed. Someone has checked on the vulnerable. Someone has adjusted a blanket. Someone has listened to the wind and decided the shutters will hold. The night remains a test. Yet the household treats it like a test they have studied for, using rules, routines, and shared attention as their answers. You breathe slowly and let your body stay warm where it can, accepting that winter is never fully defeated, only negotiated in that negotiation. the village shows its most serious skill, not just inventing warmth, but protecting life when warmth is uncertain. You lie awake long enough that your mind begins doing what minds do in the dark. It starts making theories. It tries to answer the question people still whisper across centuries. How cold was it? Really? Inside those village homes at night? And how did it feel to live that way without modern heating? The problem is that cold is not only temperature. Cold is memory, expectation, clothing, architecture, and the quiet talent of adaptation. If you could take a thermometer into the room, you might be surprised. Near the hearth zone, the air can feel genuinely warm in the corners. It can feel like the outdoors is trying to move in. The same room contains multiple climates at once. This makes the simple question, how warm was the house, difficult to answer, because the house is not a single number. It is a landscape with warm islands and cold valleys, and people learn to live on the islands. A mainstream historical fact fits here. Direct temperature measurements do not exist for most pre-modern interiors, so historians rely on indirect evidence such as building remains, household inventories, fuel accounts, contemporary descriptions, and comparisons with experimental reconstructions. These sources can suggest ranges and conditions, but they rarely provide certainty. The result is a field full of careful guesses that disagree politely, and sometimes not so politely. One argument says that many interiors are colder than modern people imagine. Thick walls can be cold sinks if they have absorbed chill for days. Small fires may not raise overall room temperature much. Drafts can pull warmth away. In this view, people often sleep in chilly air, relying heavily on bedding and clothing, and they tolerate indoor cold as normal. The evidence supporting this can include descriptions of people sleeping in hats, accounts of frozen water indoors, and the emphasis on keeping close to the hearth. Another argument pushes back and says, yes, cold exists, but people are not living in constant misery. Small rooms, low ceilings, and long-burning coals can produce a warm zone that feels comfortable for many evening hours. Enclosed beds and heavy textiles can make sleep warmth quite good even when the room is cool. In this view, the house is a system that works, not a failed attempt at modern comfort. The evidence can include robust traditions of winter domestic life, the survival of people through long cold seasons, and architectural features that suggest an intent to create stable interiors rather than tolerate suffering. Historians still argue whether cultural adaptation makes the experience of cold fundamentally different. If you grow up in an environment where a cool room is normal, your expectations shift. You might not interpret the same temperature as cold the way a person raised with central heating would. You also learn behaviours that modern people might not practice, like keeping extremities covered, minimising movement through unheated space, and using microclimates within a room. The debate is tricky because it mixes physics with psychology, and psychology is not preserved in ruins. There is also debate about social class. A wealthier farmhouse with multiple rooms, better construction, and more fuel can maintain a warmer interior than a poor cottage with leaky walls and limited wood. So when someone says, people lived in freezing houses, you have to ask, which people? Where? In what decade? With what fuel? The range of experience is wide, and sweeping statements can flatten reality into a single cartoon shiver. A quirky tidbit appears when scholars look at language. Words for warm, cosy, and comfort shift meaning over time and across cultures. A description of a warm room might not mean what you think it means. It might mean warmer than outdoors, or warmer than yesterday, or warm near the fire, or simply not deadly. The vocabulary of comfort is relative. You could read an account praising a pleasantly warm interior and still find it chilly by modern standards. Language becomes an unreliable thermometer that still offers clues. Another scholarly debate circles around smoke. Did people accept smoky interiors as normal? Or did they actively dislike it and strive to avoid it? Some evidence suggests people complain about smoke, especially when it irritates eyes and lungs. Other evidence suggests smoke is treated as an ordinary companion to warmth, a trade that many households accept. The truth may again be mixed. People may dislike smoke and still accept it because alternatives cost too much. Dislike does not always lead to change when change is expensive. You also think about the role of fuel scarcity. In forested regions, wood might be more available, allowing longer burning and more consistent warmth. In regions where wood is scarce, fires may be smaller, and households may lean harder on bedding, clothing, and architecture. This influences not only temperature but behaviour. A wood-rich village might socialise longer at night. A fuel-poor village might quiet down early and compress into the warmest zone. The household rhythm becomes part of the climate story. Historians still argue how much winter domestic life is shaped by climate alone versus shaped by cultural choices about labour, gender roles, and household organisation. For example, who tends the fire at night? Who decides where children sleep? Who controls the distribution of blankets? These choices influence who feels warm and who feels cold. Some scholars emphasise that warmth is not distributed equally and can reflect power dynamics within the home. Others emphasise cooperation and shared survival. Both patterns can exist, depending on household structure and local norms. Here is your first light joke. Scholars argue about indoor temperatures, and the villagers are over here solving the problem with a hat and stubbornness. You also consider the evidence from material culture. The presence of many blankets, bed curtains, foot warmers, and insulated sleeping spaces suggests that people invest heavily in warmth management. That investment implies the problem is serious, but it also implies they have effective strategies. A society does not keep refining bedding and household techniques for centuries if nothing works at all. The existence of the solutions is evidence that the solutions do something. Here is your second light joke. If you want to know what winter felt like, imagine your house being one big close the door, we are heating the neighbourhood argument. Here is your third light joke. Very soft. The most common historical temperature unit is how annoyed your toes are. You let your thoughts settle on a calmer conclusion, even if the air in the room is cool. People create warmth pockets. They live in layers. They sit in warm zones. They sleep in enclosed spaces. They share bedding. They move less at night. They eat warm food. They keep animals close. They patch drafts. The house is not a failure because it is not uniformly warm. It is a success because it allows life to continue through winter with limited fuel and simple materials. The debate remains because the evidence is incomplete and because experience is hard to reconstruct. Yet you can feel one thing clearly. Village warmth is never just a temperature reading. It is a set of habits, built over generations, and it changes what warm enough even means. In the dark, that thought becomes strangely soothing, because it suggests humans are adaptable, and adaptation is its own quiet kind of heat. You let the night settle into a softer texture, and you notice how change creeps into villages long before anyone calls it progress. Warmth practices evolve, not through sudden revolutions, but through small adjustments that spread when they prove useful. Even in homes that do not have modern fireplaces, the idea of controlling heat becomes more refined over time, like a craft that keeps polishing itself. One change is the shift from open hearths to more contained heating. As building skills and materials improve, some households adopt chimneys, smoke hoods, or enclosed stoves that manage smoke better and direct heat more efficiently. A hearth without a dedicated fireplace surround can still gain a better smoke path. A simple flue can reduce eye stinging and allow a fire to burn more steadily. Better smoke control often means people can afford to keep a gentle heat longer without making the air unbearable. That alone changes nights in a quiet, meaningful way. Another shift is toward thermal mass. Masonry absorbs heat and releases it slowly. A stove built of brick, clay, or stone can store warmth from a hot burn and then radiate it for hours. This kind of heating suits the nightly rhythm because you can burn fuel strongly for a while, then let the stored heat do the work while you sleep. It also reduces the need for open flame near bedding. The warmth becomes more even, less flickery, less dramatic. It is the difference between sitting beside a campfire and leaning near a sun-warmed wall. A mainstream historical fact fits here. The spread of chimneys and more efficient stoves occurs unevenly across regions and social classes, influenced by materials, trade, regulations, and building traditions. Wealthier households often adopt improvements earlier, but practical designs can eventually reach rural settings through local craftsmen. Imitation and gradual rebuilding. Textiles also evolve. As spinning wheels, looms, and trade networks improve, households can obtain more cloth, better wool, and more consistent blankets. More blankets do not just mean more comfort. They mean more flexibility in how heat is managed. A household can assign thicker layers to children or elders, keep spare bedding dry, and replace worn pieces without losing all insulation. Even small improvements in fabric quality can change the feel of a winter night dramatically. You also notice changes in household organisation. Some families begin using separate sleeping spaces more often, not because they no longer need shared warmth, but because they can finally spare enough bedding and have enough rooms to allow it. This changes privacy and routines. It also changes how people think about comfort. When you can sleep alone and still stay warm, comfort becomes more individualised, and the household's warmth economy shifts from communal to personal. A quirky tidbit appears in the way people treat new heating improvements with suspicion at first. A chimney that pulls too strongly can waste heat, and a badly built chimney can catch fire. A new stove can crack, a new design can fail in the first winter. So people do not always rush toward innovation. They watch, they listen to neighbours, they wait for proof. In a village, being early adopter can mean being person who accidentally smoked out their family, and nobody wants that title. Historians still argue about the pace of these changes. Some argue that rural heating improvements spread slowly, with old methods persisting for centuries because they are cheap and familiar. Others argue that people adopt effective warmth technologies quickly when resources allow, because the incentive is huge. The debate often comes down to local conditions. In some regions, building codes, fire concerns, or access to skilled masons accelerates change. In others, poverty and isolation slow it. You feel this subtle social changes too. When a home is warmer and less smoky, indoor life becomes more pleasant. People can work indoors longer. Children can study or practice crafts in the evening with less discomfort. Elders can sit and talk without shivering. Domestic tasks become less punishing. Warmth does not only soothe bodies, it expands what is possible in the household schedule. It makes winter less of a shutdown and more of a season with its own rhythm. Here is your first light joke. The first person to invent a better chimney is basically the village's original tech influencer, except their followers are just relieved they can see without tears. You also notice that even as changes happen, older tricks do not vanish. People keep using layered bedding, they keep sealing drafts, they keep warming stones and jugs. The house becomes a blend of old and new, because old methods still work and new ones simply add options. This is how most human change happens, not by replacing everything, but by stacking solutions. Here is your second light joke. Progress in heating is not a dramatic leap. It is just fewer moments of thinking. Why are my knees cold? You let yourself relax into the idea that warmth is a story of many small inventions. A better shutter latch, a thicker blanket, a stove that holds heat, a bed curtain that hangs more tightly, a floor covering that stays drier, a roof repaired before the rain. Each improvement is a small defence against winter's constant pressure. Here is your third light joke. Very soft. The village does not chase luxury. It chases comfortable enough to stop complaining. Now the night begins to soften, not in temperature necessarily, but in your mind. You're held by the quiet knowledge that people have always been clever about comfort, even when resources are scarce. You can picture the house as a calm shell, patched and layered, with warmth gathered and protected like a small animal nestled under cloth. You can hear the steady breathing of sleepers. You can feel the stillness of air that is not rushing through cracks. You can sense the slow release of warmth from dense objects and thick textiles. The world outside remains winter, but inside there is a pocket of human persistence. Your thoughts slow, like snow falling in the dark. Each flake a small reminder that time moves gently when you stop fighting it. You do not need to solve anything now. You do not need to measure anything. You only need to rest in the feeling of a home that knows how to endure. Through habits so ordinary they become invisible. Your eyelids grow heavier. The sounds become simpler. Breath, fabric, the faint settling of wood. You imagine the warmth collecting around you, not bright, not loud, just steady, like a dim lamp that never fully goes out. You let your body sink into that steadiness. You let your shoulders loosen. You let your hands unclench. You let the night be a long, slow exhale. And as sleep comes closer, the imagery fades into something gentle. A small room, a closed door, a thick blanket, a quiet village under a dark sky, and within it, the simple comfort of being sheltered. End of script. Sweet dreams.